So glad you guys are joining us today. I see a couple of faces that I know. I see Dan Spencer over there. Yes, sir. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Glad you're here. It's 10 o'clock Central, 11 o'clock Eastern. We're going to go ahead and get rolling. Thanks for joining us today. I want to pin a video right here so I can see something that's going on. There we go. Again, glad you guys are here as we get going this morning. A couple of kind of ground rules to help you maximize the time. The first thing I tell you is as we go through this webinar, just open your mind to new thinking. We're going to be talking about how to create a culture of generosity. Probably going to stretch your mind in ways you think, and so want to just encourage you to be open to those things and just listen. Let's eliminate those distractions. So if you have an application, if you have ESPN going on as an application on the side, turn that off, or you may want to silence your cell phone. Just try to give yourself some undivided attention here. Down at the bottom of the Zoom, and I think at this point via COVID, we're all familiar with Zoom. There's a chat box. We'd love to know, who you are, where you're from. So drop your name and city in there so we know who you are. And then we're going to utilize that chat box for Q&A. And so we may do some of that as we go along, as we highlight a specific section. You may want to ask a question, and we'd love to answer that question. But at the very least, at the end, we're going to cull through that chat box and make sure we're answering questions to help you out. So in the way of introduction, my name is Kent Vincent. I'm Nashville based and been living here for about 9 years now, and have been in local church ministry for 22 years, been able to work with churches. A lot of you that I'm looking at right now have had opportunity to work with you over the last 5.5 years. And so I'm going to host our webinar today. I'm joined by my buddy. One of the great things about Auxano is not only do we get to work with great churches, but we get to work with great people. And Greg is a good friend of mine. And so you're gonna love hearing from him. So Greg is joining us today. We did this last year. Greg has become prolific as a book writer. And last year, I think it was last year, he released the capital campaign playbook. And this year, during COVID, he has put pen to paper, and we're going to be releasing another book, which is creating a culture of generosity. Greg, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. I completed my walk this morning with my wife, wind chill -2. So I am awake and invigorated, ready to roll.
Greg is Detroit based. So when he says wind chill, he's got serious wind chill. We were complaining being in Nashville, having a little ice, and he just looked at us and laughed at us this morning like, come on, man, don't be weak. So Greg, we're excited to kind of unveil. Now the book, give us just a quick overview of the book. Tell us timelines of when it's going to drop. Give us a quick overview before we dive into the content.
Yeah, sure. I'm excited that it's, at the final stages. We're about to release it on Amazon in a couple of weeks. And so the people that are on today, and I see names of friends popping up and clients who have become friends and friends who have become clients. So it's fun to see kind of a family. So I'm pumped to get it all to you as soon as possible. So we're giving an official sort of launch date on Amazon of March 1. So 3/1, it'll be out and available to the whole world, but I'm hoping that's sooner. And then I'll let you all know, the people that are on this webinar, we'll give you a little early jump on it. So
it's great. As you guys signed in or logged in to get the information for the webinar, we either have already or will at the end of this webinar send you the introduction and first chapter to kind of get you going. And then when the book becomes available, we'll make sure to ping you on that. So let's dive in. So right now, the hot word is generosity. Oh, generosity, generosity. So Greg, the first question out of the chute is, as we're using it all about that word, all about the church world right now, when we say the word generosity, what are we talking about, and why is it an important topic?
Yeah, the question really is a question of defining terms, right? And so I love tackling this because to some extent, there are a lot of terms that kind of bump into each other. And in the book, we have a whole definition of terms chapter because there's stewardship and giving and sacrifice and, donor, all those kinds of things that kind of bounce around this word. But when it comes to trying to have this rooted in scripture and rooted in discipleship, which is what you're going to hear us talk about for the rest of our time together, there are so many things that widen the lens that include financial giving, but generosity has has to do with the whole posture of being. That my assertion in the book is that Jesus people ought to be the most generous people, because in essence, we're reflecting the God we serve, who was so giving that he gave his only son on our behalf. And that there's so much in scripture from front to back about people who have things giving them away to people who need things, whether that be time or money or influence or whatever word you want to use there. So generosity for me, we're going to tackle a lot that has to do with giving in the church, but it's a much more robust word that has to do with, all those other things: attitudes, behaviors, postures, etc.
Excellent. Now, all the leaders on the line, when we develop cultures of generosity, there's kind of a sequence that we flow through, and Greg has written the book kind of in that sequence, and we're going to call them waves. And so the first wave is around theology. So, Greg, the question is, why is beginning with theology the best place to start?
Yeah. So I should give you a little kind of a spoiler alert that the thing that we develop with churches and is outlined in the book is what we call a generosity discipleship plan. And so this plan is a fully orbed, fully articulated, proactive approach to creating a culture of generosity. But for churches, we don't go in and sort of say, hey, this is exactly what you need to do. We come alongside and coach within your context and your theology. And so my first question to pastors and senior leaders of churches, the men and women that really shape the culture, is, hey, what do you actually believe about generosity? What do you actually believe about giving or money and possessions? How much does the teachings of Jesus or the principles of the Old Testament animate what you do? Or everything from your sermons and teaching all the way to your policy and procedure. For me, as a systematic theologian by education, I'm always like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Before we start talking about, like calendars and, giving, electronic giving, slow your roll. Let's just have at least one deep and thorough conversation. What do you believe? Because like in every other aspect of discipleship, what you do should emanate out of your most closely held convictions or what you believe. So that's why we always start with theology. I'm just going to ask you not just what you believe, but have you written that down? Is it anywhere in kind of a statement, even a bullet list of this is what we believe? So it's always fun to hear even the different shades or nuances from one pastor to another, or one senior leader to another, in terms of how they articulate their theology of generosity.
Yeah. To kind of piggyback on that too, Greg, one of the things I have found as I've worked with churches and especially around the idea of theology is there's such a different theological bent even in the same church between a pastor and elders, and what an elder might believe theologically about this whole idea of even discipling generosity.
Right.
And so landing this particular topic serves a great purpose within the church. So that would be the first wave, is kind of identifying your theology, landing that, codifying, quantifying language. We then move to discipleship. Now, this is one of those, I'm sure you have found the same thing, and I can't wait for you to unpack it. When we talk about, like when I talk to a pastor about you can disciple generosity, they just look at me like calf at a new gate, like, really? And so the question here is, can you actually disciple generosity? And if so, how, without it feeling icky?
Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to say here is, as I'm diagnosing in the book, and just when I'm hanging out with you and we're talking, is the men and women that lead churches, particularly in North America, are kind of my tribe, right? So whenever I'm even critiquing what's going on in the church, I come at it as a fellow sojourner. I pastored for a dozen years before I shifted into more of this coaching role. And so to some extent, I want to say about all of us, we haven't really been given the tools to shift the money talk from the finance department to the discipleship office. We were really never taught that. That's not something that at least we covered in seminary, and a lot of my mentors and leaders, most of the time when they were talking about money, it was about budgets, or being behind budget or ahead of budget, or budgets driving what we're doing or whatever. And to some extent, that's a very real part of church life. But one of the kind of statements I make in the book and in my own coaching is, Jesus doesn't allow us just to leave money into the budget, sort of how do we pay the bills category. As a matter of fact, every time he was talking about money, it had much more to do with, as you know, someone's heart or their attitude or their posture or their level of willingness to open up their hands. And yet still at the church, even though we kind of know that cognitively about Jesus teaching or what scripture says, we still default to saying, hey, we're once a year, we're going to have a stewardship sermon series, or, we're going to talk about money only when we absolutely have to because we're so far behind budget. And so we unintentionally train people that what they're giving is only about keeping the church afloat. And that's not true. And Jesus doesn't allow us to even have that as a sort of baseline of what giving is all about. So it's obviously it's a much longer and deeper conversation. But what we try to say to senior leaders is, if this is a key part of being a Jesus follower, then it's like every other aspect of discipleship or maturation in the faith or sanctification, if you want to use the big word. Like, how do you get from one point to another in your prayer life? Well, you start in a very elementary way, and then your parents and pastors and mentors show you what's the next step, the next step, the next step. How do you grow in your understanding of how to wrestle with scripture? Well, you start at a very elementary level. Like I said, when I was little, the pages were thick and the pictures were cartoon-like. But then over time, someone showed me, here's how to interpret scripture. And we went from step to step to step. But in the church, we don't disciple. We just have this sort of on-off switch of giving where we say, you're either generous or you're not. You either have the light switch on or you don't. We don't take the time to disciple people, to take them by the hand and mentor them or walk them through. Well, what about this next step? What about testing God in this way? What about trying this as a way to open up your hands and release what God has given you? And so I'm really calling me and all of my friends to say, what if we did it differently and we really put it into the discipleship office?
So to that end, a pathway, which is what the steps that you're describing, and it's a little far behind you and behind me. It may be hard for folks to read. Give us an example of this is one example, but walk us through a pathway. Tell us how that's helpful in self-diagnosis. Like give us the reasoning behind why this is an important piece.
Yeah, first of all, this is very exciting because we give kind of models of what other churches have done. So when I sat down with a pastor in Austin this last week, I showed him a couple of models and he and his team kind of looked at them and said, yeah, that's close, but it's not quite our culture or the way we would say it. Or he even had some theological nuance to what he wanted to call the places on the pathway or the steps on the pathway. For instance, he wanted to really not make it feel like it was like the one behind me, which was kind of a promotion schedule, like you're a better Christian if you move up the line, right? So he shifted even the icons to reflect their theology. But in essence, he still has what we hope for, which is, where are you at? It's a self-diagnosis. If I read, you can't see them here, but if you read the titles of the step or stage on the generosity maturation pathway, then you can self-assess. You can say, oh, I'm kind of right here. And it looks like my next step is here. And so we're basically sitting down with every senior leadership team and saying, if you don't make a clear pathway, then you're really not helping anybody in their maturity in the category of generosity. So, hey, pastor, or hey, elder board, or hey, team, let's come up with some ways to show these steps, almost like rocks across a river, from low generosity maturity to a higher level of generosity maturity. And when you make it literally icons like this, graphics that help people, then our churches will actually do an anonymous self-assessment. They'll send these graphics out and have people click, oh, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And then leadership can say, okay, we've got sort of 25% of our people in this zone and 30% of our people in this zone. And then you can shepherd or pastor or mentor accordingly. So that's what the pathway is all about, Ken. And all of this stuff is explained in the book. As a matter of fact, the other examples and this one behind me, which is giving names to those steps across the river.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That pathway is so important in self-diagnosing. And so this is the external expression, right? So we're discipling external. The third wave you talk about in the book really is more internal. You put it under the header of strategy, but it's the nuts and bolts of behind the scenes. And so the question is, what are the principles of healthy strategy? Give us some handles for this.
Absolutely. So when you think about the 5 waves, we're on number 3. And my assertion is, for a church to create a culture of generosity, they have to dive into 5 of these areas. they have to spend some time kind of sitting down and thinking through each one of these. And so when you sit down and think through strategy, what I mean by that is in what way are we proactive and not reactive? As I alluded to earlier, most churches will talk about money more in a reactive way. And sometimes that's not bad. For instance, if a tragedy happens and we need to give money to it, great. That's a reaction, and that's a positive reaction. But if we're only reacting and we're not being proactive, you can see over my shoulder that when we help a church with proactivity, we're literally outlining a year's worth of strategic components. And those components are probably some things that you're doing right now. Like a lot of this stuff, I'm not pretending that I have a brand new way of looking at digital giving or things like that. Of course, there's some pointers in there. But what we're trying to say is if you arrange it in a certain way, if you have your generosity discipleship plan that's comprehensive and articulated and calendarized, then you're not saying, oh, crud, we better do something about this money thing. You already have built into the calendar times when you're teaching, times when you're encouraging recurring digital giving, times when you're doing giving statements or impact reports where you're modeling for the congregation where their money's going. So you're demonstrating transparency. And so we just say to churches, look, take like a year snapshot and place those strategic components in so that they don't surprise you. But just like you plan everything else in your church calendar, have these planned ahead of time. And there's lots of other things in the strategic part, like budgeting and policy and procedure. And it's kind of that crunchy sort of back office stuff that what I would say is if you're not handling that well, if you don't have kind of a good polish on it professionally with integrity, audits, all that kind of stuff, it just won't help you create the culture of generosity that you could if people in the church had a sense of, oh man, my church is so good at handling money. Particularly that's a criticism of the church, sometimes a founded criticism, sometimes unfounded. But if the members of your church can say, yeah, I'm not worried about my church at all. They're transparent about it. They elect to have audits. They don't even have to, but they do. I can ask anybody a question anytime. It's super organized at the back office. That just amps up trust, and trust is always the beginning of generosity anyway, at least in the context of the church.
Yeah, that's good. And if you've ever, any of you watching today any of you leaders, if you've ever worked with us, you've heard this type of thing before, because this is all new competencies. And when you're learning a new competency, the best way to get it ingrained is to simply calendar it. Like don't wait or think that you're just going to automatically be prompted because it's a new competency. So building out the calendar really matters. Greg, just to let everybody, and this is for all of you guys, there are great partners out there that we have that provide services that are extremely helpful. And one of those partners for us is Mortarstone, which is a data analytics company. And they are for the church. We have used or worked with them for several years, and I have personally used their data analytics. They're offering all of you today, and we'll send this in a follow-up email, the link to it. Basically, they're giving you, if you want it, a free year of Mortarstone Basic. And what that's going to allow you to do is to pull down some real-time analytics to judge your health in giving. How's your church giving? To track giving from all your funds and locations if you're a multi-site, to analyze donor retention rates, to track if you're in the middle of a giving campaign of some sort. It'll allow you to track all of that, and then really understand your donor giving demographics. So it's going to be a free offer. Really, there's nothing else that comes with it. It's going to be a link. It's going to take you to their site. It's going to give you a play-by-play of what to do next. I would tell you this, and Greg and I haven't talked about this, but we've got several of our generosity guys on this webinar. But if you take them up on the offer, once you get your data logged in, if you'd like some help interpreting what you're reading, just let us know. We'll hop on a call for 30 minutes or so and help you kind of unpack all of that. So I'm making that offer without talking to anybody. So don't you love that spontaneity? So anyway, we'll send you the information on this, but Mortarstone is a real help in the area of tracking and really knowing what you're looking at.
Yeah, and Ken, I would say the first time I saw the Mortarstone analytics report, I was like, man, this is cool. Yeah. I mean, like, it was really amazing the way that even the report came out, the way they broke it down. Yeah, these are some of the things we have in the we have other challenges in the modern church, but understanding data is one of our advantages now these days. So
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Wave 4 is about communication. So when we look at that, what kind of things might we need to communicate, and then what forums or tools should we utilize while we communicate?
yeah, this shouldn't be surprising to anybody that if you're going to change culture, the media department, communication department, they're going to be a part of that in some way. One of the things I want to say about this, though, is it really does take a shift in posture for many church leaders just to even say that we want to normalize communication about money. So you've heard me touch on this a few times because I think it's very important that, again, it's not once a year, it's not reactive, it's proactive. But that's a shift for some church leaders, and I'm not presuming that's easy for you. Like, I'm not just saying, oh, this is easy, just do this now. I get that some of you are going to have to navigate elder boards and other staff members, and this is going to take a little time to kind of start what I would say is normalizing talk about money. Because remember, there's all kinds of emotions tied to it. There's emotions tied to it for staff members who may believe that they're getting underpaid. There's emotion tied to it for people who have been wronged by the church and your congregation at other churches in some way. Maybe your church even has a history of some malfeasance way back in their past. And so we're always overcoming kind of this, the spiritual nature of what money does to trip some triggers in each one of our hearts. I could start preaching now about that, but I won't. But what I will say, as soon as you have shifted and said, yeah, you know what, we do want to normalize this, then I would say is how else do you normalize anything in your church culture other than by using the platforms that you have? So, of course, preachers are always going to go to sermons, and they should. But I would say even with that, I would encourage you to not always think about just the one time a year we probably ought to have a money series, but try to figure out how you can weave in normalizing generosity talk in other kinds of series. And some of you are way ahead of me on this. You know that the best thing to do when you're doing, let's say, a series on marriage is to talk about how money can impact a marriage. And in so doing, you get a little shot at, teaching biblical generosity and so on. So I would say even on that one, widen it, spread it out. Don't make it the one time a year. I had a buddy back in my home church in Philly that would say, see you in church after the offering. It's cheaper that way. And he was only half kidding, because most people, when they know a money talk is coming, October is money month, let's just kind of not participate, but I would say weave it in, right? And then all the other ways, storytelling is critical. That it's very powerful to hear a personal story from a member of the congregation. Utilize the offering moments well, be proactive with them. We used to tell, when I was working at Kensington Church, I've got Kensington friends on the line right here, but they know that the teaching pastors, when they were prepping their messages, would literally prep their offering moment. So we would say to the teachers, look, if you're sitting down in your study, you're praying, you're reading, whatever, don't neglect the offering moment as a part of what you're preparing to shepherd the people to do. So write it out or outline it just like you're outlining the rest of your message. And then all the other things you already are way ahead of me on, mass emails and your app and social media. Again, you want to make sure you do this in proper doses, right? And not shift your church from first gear to fifth all of a sudden, because that will be jarring. But over time, say, hey, how can we communicate differently? And remember the word normalize. You want to normalize it so that we just talk about money. Money is not God. It's just a thing that God enables us to use and manage. And so in so doing, then you're kind of showing people, you're putting money in its place. We shouldn't be afraid of it or worship it. We're just going to talk about it because it's a thing. It's part of life. It's part of discipleship. And so leaders, you can really model the way.
Yeah. When the book comes out, we're actually going to help you. Greg put this in. It's beautiful. It's kind of a quick audit. And so just real quick, I want to share with you the topics, and you can even just do a quick score right now. But we use a Likert scale, 1 to 5. 1 is really no intentionality behind this thing, or 5 is very intentional. But here are some of those topics. And Greg, you may want to just, if I'll flip them on the screen, and you may want to speak to them. But here are the things. Here are the things that we want to audit as we go along. So the first is worship. You want to speak to that, any, Greg?
Yeah, I think, a leadership team, senior pastor and other friends, even if they just sat down around a conference table and said, hey, how could we normalize teaching biblical generosity in worship? Most of us would say, well, certainly during the offering moment, but even that's getting wonky these days as most people are giving digitally, and most of digital giving is not happening during the worship service, it's happening during the week. But you still need to ask, in our most public service, what are we doing to encourage people and have real positive vibes and biblical vibes about generosity?
Yeah.
Are we intentional or are we unintentional is the question.
Yeah. And you can score that right now and go, hey, just look at currently what we're doing. Are we very intentional? Not intentional. Next topic might be teaching. Speak to
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you've got most of the folks that are on this call right now, no doubt, have well, I realize everything's a little crazy for this past 12 months, but even with that, you have classes, whether they're online or in person, and groups and seminars and other kinds of gatherings. My colleague Alex and I created these gatherings just to encourage people and thank them and be able to normalize money talk, be able to gather people into a room of 20 and say, hey, we just want to thank you for your generosity toward the church. And in so doing, you were able to see this church get planted or this missionary get funded or whatever. So anytime you're just thinking about when do we gather other than the big service, the worship service, what are the small groups, Sunday school classes, seminars, and so on, and ask the question, are we intentional about building biblical generosity into that, or are we unintentional? And what could we do maybe differently going forward?
Yeah. This next one is one triggers. It's one that when I work with churches, typically there are really no triggers in place. Talk to that, Greg.
Trigger is just when something happens, it triggers a response. So that's what that means, the word trigger. So for instance, when someone gives for the first time, that should trigger a response. When someone maybe donates stock for the first time, when someone maybe is in trouble, maybe we notice because of analytics like Mortarstone that their giving has curtailed or dropped off. Well, there's a pastoral care opportunity there. It's not, hey, how come you're not giving? It's, hey, Kent, is everything okay? Is there any way we can help you? We would do that at the large church. And if we saw some sort of a problem, we would step in and often give them money if they needed it, if there was a pastoral issue. But anyway, those are the triggers. Triggers can be lapse in giving or maybe large gift. For instance, for the longest time, when I was, doing pastoral ministry, I didn't know this stuff. So some family would write us a $10,000 check. And I was like, cool, deposit it. I never thought, oh my gosh, they probably want to know that we got it, that we deposited it, that it went to the place that they wanted it to go, et cetera. So as a young pastor, I was just never thinking, I have a relationship with these folks. They're deciding before God that they want to give something abnormal, like a large gift or start giving for the first time, which for some people is huge, right? They've been skeptical and they finally dropped their first $50 check or their first, digital gift. We want to encourage that and just respond. So it should trigger a response. So every church, we just ask, what do you want to add? We don't necessarily need to add 10 things at once, but first time gift, large gift, and so on. How do you want to set up triggers?
Now we're going to talk about this a little bit more in this next wave, but relationships, as we audit our generosity, relationships. Speak to that, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, relationships is a big deal because ultimately, if we are talking discipleship, then we have to shift from transactional thinking about giving, like a person gives money and it goes into the bank account, and I encourage them to keep doing that, which is, again, part of it. But relationship says, hey, this is more about our relationship with each other, with the community of faith, with this congregation, with God, with our mentors, with our small group leader. So ultimately, I mean, if you've ever read any of these statistics, what we know is that most people who are good givers learned it in their primary relationship, which was their family. So aside from a family relationship, if someone is coming into the faith later, or if they didn't have a family, primary family of faith, then they need to have this other family, the church family, that gathers around them and says, look, we're not trying to shake you down for your money, but in the Jesus way, people who manage their money in a God's kingdom way actually have a better life. They lead a more Jesus life, whether the church needs the money or not. By the way, you'll read in the book, one of my true tests of whether or not this has become a discipleship issue in your church is the $100 million test, which is, if I came in, pastor, and slapped a $100 million check down on your desk, would you say, woohoo, hallelujah, we're never going to have to talk about money again? Some of you are like, yeah, I'm kind of tempted to say that. And what I would say is, if this causes you to say, I never want to talk about money again, then I would call that pastoral malpractice. Because if you're my pastor, I need you in that relationship to help me know how to manage my life and my giving and my generosity better. So it always comes down to really the relational aspect of it. Otherwise, it's just kind of talking about numbers and dollar signs.
This next audit piece is campaigns. These are special giving initiatives throughout the year. Speak to that real quick, Greg.
Yeah, I still believe in campaigns. I think as much as there's a movement toward not doing capital campaigns or special giving campaigns anymore, um, I still think they really catch people in a beautiful way. And it surges their spiritual growth. It encourages them about the mission of the church. And they're still raising money. As a matter of fact, I just was able to help two churches in a capital campaign during the pandemic. And both of them outpaced their targeted number. They raised more money than they thought they were going to raise. And so I still think God uses campaigns in special ways. And so I would say, as much as we're tempted to say, I never want to do that again, don't give up, and we'll help you out with that, because we still love it. We think it's really great for spiritual and financial benefit.
Now, we spoke a bit about strategy and administration, but as we audit, one of those things we need to audit is how do we do with our regular practices? So speak to administration.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of mentioned this before, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a significant part of it, because I want to be able to look my neighbor in the eye and say, man, I fully trust my church. So for me, it almost has an evangelistic component to it, but it certainly has a generosity component to it, because if I have any kind of skepticism, or if I feel like the way money's handled is a little wonky, or it's hidden or secret, I'm just not going to be as apt to be generous to the church, even if I'm apt to be generous to another organization. By the way, this is a kind of a totally different topic, somewhat covered in the book too, but faith-based nonprofits and even non-faith-based nonprofits are kind of ahead of the church. Like, they're doing a much better job of demonstrating impact or effectiveness and transparency. And so I'm like, come on, church, let's do this. We can do it. We have a story to tell. You know, God is using many of our churches, even during pandemic, to do amazing things, but we're kind of behind the curve when it comes to the administrative reporting, transparency stuff. Again, not that anyone's intentionally hiding anything. We just never stretched that muscle. We were never taught this stuff in sort of seminary and in early mentoring. So now I'm saying, let's bump that one up a notch. And if you need help with that, we'll help you.
That's great. And then finally, this is the last audit part, is just simply discipleship. You know, how are we doing it overall in our discipleship? So speak quickly to that, please.
Yeah, man. I mean, you know, this is why Auxano even exists. So the reason that we do what we do is to help churches shift from, you know, sort of institutional and super programmatic approaches to ministry, and try to help them continue to inch toward having their ministry be all about discipleship. And so for me, you know, the two worlds collide, right? Auxano gives clarity to churches about discipleship pathways. And because I've done a bunch of work in generosity, to me, that's the same thing. And so when we start asking questions about how do we disciple generosity, it may actually open a little a can of worms, in a way, because you may say, honestly, I'm not sure we're doing discipleship in any category. You know, generosity is the last of my worries now. We don't even have a discipleship plan. But for me, it always has to come down to, are we moving people toward the Jesus life by following Jesus' teachings and showing other people how to do that, and doing that in very relational ways? You can define discipleship all kinds of different ways, but that's what we mean. We mean a lot less about like the teaching informational component of it, and a lot more about showing people the way, the Jesus way, particularly in generosity.
It's good. So leaders, what you just saw, again, all of this is in the book, but those are 7 points that you could do a quick audit on. And if you use that 1 to 5 Likert scale, you know, not intentional at all is 1, 5 is very intentional. Let's say you did a score and you came up with a total score of 21. Well, that's, you know, 21 or less, it's time for us to talk to help you get where you need to go. But it's really designed to help you go, we need to lean in here, do better here. So it's really as designed as a tool. Again, it's going to be in the book that's going to be coming out in March. So I want to jump to the last wave. I leaned into it a little bit, but it's around integration. So Greg, what does robust integration look like in the life of a church?
Yeah. So let's review. We've got 5 waves. And if you do the 5 waves, you're going to have, remember the end game is generosity, discipleship, plan. So we're going to say something about our theology. We're going to say something about discipleship. We're going to talk about strategy. That's all the calendaring, nuts and bolts stuff. Communication. How are we going to communicate? And then this last wave is integration. This is where the rubber meets the road, because integration to me is, how do we literally make this work into a day-to-day culture shift? And to me, you have to talk about a handful of things. We talk about how to navigate this with staff, with elders, ministry leaders, etc. For me, this is touching on another category, which is everything rises and falls on leadership. So if you don't have staff and elders and ministry leaders and small group leaders and Sunday school teachers kind of singing from the same song sheet, then it'll be hard to change culture. Because pastor, if you say one thing, but then your Sunday school teacher says something else, an hour later, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to shift a culture. So for me, integration is about, what do we hold leaders accountable to? It's about, how do we not have a one size fits all approach to coaching people in generosity? For instance, in your offering moment, do you realize that you may have 5 different generations listening to your same offering moment? And so for us to just think, man, I'm just going to nail it. I'm going to say, tell a story, and it's just going to hit the 70-year-old the same way it's going to hit the 20-year-old and everybody in between. This is where, by the way, this is the most complex part of it, but it's where I love to camp, because I'm like, the church could go a whole new step in this if we really ask some hard questions. For instance, one of the things in the book is frequently asked questions, right? So there's a whole chapter on FAQs. One of the frequently asked questions is, should we hold our leaders, staff and other kinds of leaders, to some standard of either belief or practice regarding financial giving? I'm not going to answer that for you on this call right now, but I am going to tell you it's one you got to tackle. Because if you completely ignore that, then what you're doing is taking the culture creators, which are your leaders, your men and women that drive the culture, and you're basically saying, we don't care what they think or how they behave when it comes to generosity and giving. They're just going to use their influence however they want in that category. So you can probably suspect what my advice is in this area. But if we're shifting a culture, we're shifting it through leaders. And if we're shifting it through leaders that have no accountability or understanding in this area, then that's, to me, a big part of integration. So that's a fun one to talk about. It's not easy, but it's worth it.
Now, Greg, you just ran through it again, but just as a quick overview, remind us again of the waves, the 5 waves as we create a culture of generosity. Remind us of what those 5 waves are.
Absolutely. It's hard for me to not get into this and over explain everything. So I'll just stick to the 5 waves. But in the book, basically under each wave, there's about 5 chapters that, kind of almost like a jewel, they turn it around and look at different facets of theology, discipleship, strategy, communication, and integration. So the book's like 30 chapters. It's kind of like a reference guide, really. And some of those things, actually, when Kent, you first read it, you said, man, this has got to be on the shelf, because some pastors are going to say, hey, I got to go back and read that section about, should we hold leaders accountable? Or I got to go back and read that section about audits. Like, why is that important? And why should I suggest that to my team and things like that? So you can read it all the way through if you want. It's very readable, but at the same time, it's a reference guide too that'll cover all this stuff. But again, I want to remind you, the end game is, in your own way, in your own style, in your own theology, your own language, GDP, generosity, discipleship, plan. It's the proactive approach that takes everything you've touched on in those 5 waves and puts it into an articulated, calendared way to proactively disciple people to a more generous way of living.
So, Greg, as we shift now to some Q&A, and by the way, great comments, guys. Thank you guys for putting all this in the chat box. A couple of quick questions. How does your approach gear to the smaller church? Jeff asked that. So how does this gear toward a smaller church?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's quite scalable, because Jeff, if I was sitting down with you, I would ask you a lot of the same questions. So I would say, what's your theology? Okay, let's go over that. Let's write it out. And then how do you disciple people? And you may say, well, we're a small church. We have this and this. I would say, okay, well, how are we going to normalize weaving generosity into the things that you do have? Not talk about what you don't have, right? And then even the strategy stuff where I'm talking about audits and digital giving and all that kind of stuff. Well, some churches don't have all that stuff. So I would say, okay, well, your plan is for the next 12 months, either to make those as effective as you possibly can, the things that you do have, or maybe part of your plan is to add some feature this year to your generosity discipleship plan. And so I think it's very scalable. Again, we work with churches that are super, super large, and we work with a ton of smaller churches. I'm working with church plants right now. They don't have anybody. They have 20 people, right? But they asked me about this generosity framework because they're trying to get ahead of the curve and make sure that it's built into the architecture of their brand new church.
So, Greg, a different Greg, asked this question, and it's kind of a bigger question, and it really speaks to the Auxano process around vision. But the question is, when you talk about generosity as a category, what other categories do you consider as part of a discipleship plan?
Oh, that's great. Wow. So in a discipleship plan, again, maybe go back and look at some of our webinar recordings on the full visionary discipleship plan. That's Auxano's really bread and butter. That's what we've been doing for 17 years. But to speak to that, one of the key features of it is we ask each church, basically, we turn the question back on you. We say, what do you think is a fully orbed or fully mature disciple? If you could wave a magic wand and the Holy Spirit changed me as a part of your church, what would be the categories of my life that you would want to see transformed by Jesus Christ? Well, generosity is one of them. Certainly, my understanding of prayer, my understanding of relationships, my understanding of people who are disconnected from God, like the evangelism thing, whatever word you want to put on that. My connection with sort of the church itself in terms of worship services and engagement. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we see churches kind of enumerate on their, we want to diagnose this. Are our people engaging with their disconnected and lost friends? Or we want to diagnose, are our people spending time in prayer? Are our people, and so on. So yeah, it's a fun discussion. And I would say some of it is driven by some baseline stuff we see in scripture, but other things are nuanced based on a particular calling of a particular church and how they want to see discipleship happen in their midst and in their context.
Well, folks, I don't see any other questions on here. Great comments. By the way, I just got to give a shout out here. So Susan Welch, you know Susan Welch?
I do. Hi, Susan.
She is affirming you, Greg, and your work there at Kensington over the years. So Susan's out there, and we just want to say thank you for that affirmation.
Thanks, Susan.
For all of you leaders, thanks for joining us today. Make sure we have your information. We're going to send you a couple of things in follow-up. We're going to send you the chapters from the book. We're going to send you the mortar stone piece, the link to do that. And as a reminder, if you decide you want to go and take advantage of the mortar stone offer, it's a free year. Log on, upload your data. It's going to be pretty quick how quickly we can generate these reports. And if you'd like somebody to help you interpret that, just let us know, and we'll be happy to do that. And I think that's it, Greg. Is there anything else that I'm missing? So the book, the Mortarstone offer, I think that's it, right?
No, it's been fun. I love this, and I'm excited for the book to come out in a couple of weeks, and very encouraging to have all of you join us today. This is a conversation. It's a big deal for any time in the church, but certainly post-pandemic church, where a lot of us have questions about this category and what it's going to look like going forward. So yeah, it means a lot to us that you'd hop on.
Well, guys, thank you all for joining us. And again, any questions that pop up coming down the road, just feel free to reach out to us, ask us a question. We're here to help you. We're for the church, of the church, and for the church. And we want you to be successful in discipling this generosity piece. I think that's it. Blessings, guys, and look for us in the future.
See you all later. Thank you.